Welcome to Hudson Institute's Dialogues on American Foreign Policy series. My name is Walter Russell Mead. I'm a distinguished fellow at Hudson Institute, director of the Institute's Center for the Future of Liberal Society. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Robert Kagan, senior fellow at Brookings Institution and contributing columnist at the Washington Post. Robert Kagan served in the State Department from 1984 to 1988. That was a long time ago.
Tell me about it.
As a member of the policy planning staff, as principal speechwriter for Secretary of State George P. Shultz, and as deputy for policy in the Bureau of Inter-American Affairs. Kagan is the author of a number of books, including Return of History and the End of Dreams, Dangerous Nation, America's Place in the World from its Earliest Days to the Dawn of the 20th Century, Of Paradise and Power, A Twilight Struggle. His most recent work, The Jungle Grows Back, America and Our Imperiled World, looks at the ways in which the post-World War II world order is under threat, the impulse in American society to withdraw from the world, and the reasons why U.S. global engagement remains as important as ever. So Bob, thank you for joining me today. It's great to see you again. Obviously, we don't, at the time this is being taped, we don't know for sure how the election is coming out, but it looks reasonably likely that there's going to be a change of administration. What do you, I know we, at that moment, everybody says, yeah, no, but I said that 4 years ago. And I was right, there was a change of administration. But we have a new team coming in, presumably. How will the world have changed? What new challenges will they face? Are there any new opportunities? What's your view of the global situation now with a new administration coming in?
Well, thank you, Walter. I'm glad. It's great to talk to you again. I'm glad you're so confident that we can already talk about who the new administration is, because at this moment right now, I'm going on record as saying I'm not at all confident that we will have a new administration come January for one reason or another. But in any case, either administration will face the same world, obviously, to some extent. And I do think that, as always is the case, the difference between the behavior of one administration and the next will not be as night and day as everyone thinks. There are certain, we really do have I think you might agree as a historian, our tendency to look at the world, at history or the world in 4-year increments, as if that is the determining factor is the name of the person in the White House, is clearly not true, especially for a democracy which has some very fixed attitudes about its place in the world. So I would say I'm always one of these people, and that's probably my failing, but I think it's my nature as a historian to just be skeptical when people say things are about to be radically different, either in terms of policy, but also in terms of the nature of the international situation. And I think that one thing Trump has demonstrated is that the fundamental geopolitical structure of the world that I would say probably came into being around World War I, certainly came to full fruition in World War II, which is the bringing into the picture of the United States. That was the radical change, and we're still living in that world. And I think that we really underestimate the uniqueness of the American position in the world. And I'm not talking about, I could talk about the ideological elements of that, but the pure geopolitical aspect of it, which is to have essentially an island superpower that does not live next to other great powers in a world where everyone else lives in an incredibly crowded and competitive neighborhood. The fact that the United States can essentially send the bulk of its power overseas, thousands of miles away, without risking its home position is such a unique situation. And it has shaped the world and will continue to shape the world. And why I bring this up is because it's clear that Trump is not in the tradition, he's much more in the, as he would say, the America First pre-World War II tradition of what goes on in America, outside America, is not any, we don't care. We don't care about why we have all these alliances, etc. And yet he's made it clear how hostile he is to our alliances, but yet our alliances are still hanging there saying, please come back. And that is just a condition of the world. And so there turns out there's a lot of ruin in the American security structure. Not to mention which I don't think Trump is actually pursuing an America First policy or anything like it. So, so I think that what we have, therefore, is an enduring situation. And the big question mark will always be, how does the United States want to deal with it? And I think that here, what's interesting is I don't think that a Biden administration is going to change the overall trajectory that the American people have been on, which is away from deep global involvement. I think they're going to cut the defense budget right away, which is going to have all kinds of implications for the rest of the world. So for me, the question is, there's a tension between the basic structure of the international system, which does not change even with the growth of China, and the particular American desire to pull back from this world. And I think that tends to continue.
In some ways, looking back on it, it seems to me that the big break in American policy was not so much the shift from Obama to Trump, although obviously there was, it was consequential, but sort of halfway through President Obama's time in office, between Obama 1 and Obama 2, where I think in the first term, Obama was, there was a lot of continuity in certain ways, and he had a different strategy for transforming the Middle East, but it was a transformational strategy, many of whose ideas had a lot of commonality with what Bush had been talking about. But then in the second term, it did shift to a kind of a withdrawal agenda, pivot to Asia. But a pivot to Asia is in some ways with an ideological withdrawal, if only because an Asian policy is less institutionalized than a Europe-focused policy. Liberal ideas play a bit less of a role in statecraft, I think, when you have an Asia-centric policy as opposed to NATO during the Cold War. So that there was both an ideological withdrawal and something of a net geopolitical withdrawal. Would you agree?
There was definitely a shift in Obama, and I think mostly it was when Obama came in, he thought he had to play by something like the old rules of the sort of Cold War and then immediate post-Cold War American foreign policy, which wasn't just Bush, but it was Clinton as well, obviously. And for instance, I think he thought he had to look like he wasn't going to lose in Afghanistan, and that because he'd run against Iraq, he had to prove that he wasn't just. And then I think he discovered the American people didn't care, and in fact, his initial instinct, which I think would have been to get out of everything and to pull back significantly from the world, because I think his basic view is that when America acts overseas, it does bad most of the time and it doesn't work. He thought he had to hide that or push against that, and then discovered that the American people were exactly where he was, or at least close to where he was. And so I think that therefore, when Trump comes along, it's aside from Trump's special qualities and the articulation of America First, it wasn't that big. It wasn't that big a shift.
Yeah, it was but I guess I look back at the Obama first term, and some of these things endure, but there are aspects of the Obama agenda that are globally transformational. The seas will begin to recede. This sort of enshrining climate policy. Right. Is a massive American act of intervention in a sense, with
if we
huge
actually
Sorry?
I mean, if you believe that we actually enshrined it, I mean, I would say there was certainly more lip service paid to this than there were actual policy accomplishments.
Well, that may be true, but I'm not sure that was his intention. And then I think, the disarmament agenda was really quite large. But also he did seem to take seriously this idea that the way to end terrorism in the Middle East is to cure the causes of terror, which is to say reduce the perceived conflict between Islamic civilization and the West, to promote democratization in the Middle East. I think he saw
Really?
what?
Really? You think that was his strategy?
First term. The Erdogan, he's one thing he and Trump have in common is that Erdogan seems to be the guy they both spent the most time talking to.
I think for different reasons, but yeah. No, I guess what I would say is, if you really woke up Barack Obama in the middle of the night and said, what is the cause of Middle East terrorism? His answer would not be dictatorship in the Middle East. His answer would be US policy.
Well, I mean, they're not unrelated.
Well, but I mean, there is as you know perfectly well, there's a perfectly coherent sort of narrative that this all began because of the first Gulf War and the long presence of American forces in the region and the apparent subservience of the Saudi king to American dictates, etc. And that, would we be better off if we had just gone? Would everybody be better off if we were just out? And so I think for me, it's very hard to believe that he was seriously and personally committed to democratization in the Middle East.
He seems awfully, I mean, I guess we'll have to wait for all the memoirs to come out and the papers to come out. It's interesting. I think maybe of Obama as less leftist than you do. Maybe where we're seeing a difference.
It's not even, look, that position is not even that left anymore. I mean, there might have been a time when that was a kind of special, whatever part of Chicago he was from, position. But I think that position has become much more mainstream. I mean, I guess the question is, if you read, there are memoirs out, and if you ask me who I think is closest to where Obama wound up, at least, it would be someone like Ben Rhodes. And I think
wound up.
Wound up. Well, wound up in actuality. Again, I guess the difference, I don't even know if it's a difference, but how much of what Obama was doing in his first term was based on the perception of what a president had to do to make the American people feel like he was a good leader, and how much of the second term was him realizing that that's not what anyone was asking of him. So he was able to be more what he had intended to be.
Yeah. So, well, if true, that's another kind of similarity between Obama and Trump, that both had very little respect for the blob.
Well, that's right.
As Ben Rhodes called it.
Right.
And gradually perceived that they didn't have to pay attention to the blob.
Exactly.
Do you think that's right?
No, I think that what they don't perceive is there are roots to their position too in American history. They think they've developed something new, but of course, all kinds of, we call them isolationists now. That was the dirty word used against them at the time as well. But I mean, a lot of them, I think, fell under the category of being realists. And certainly the take the world as it is, not as you want it to be. That is the Robert Taft position. That is the Charles Beard position. That is the, the classic position. And all they are doing is restating kind of 1930s, in some cases, left-leaning like Beard, and in some cases, right-leaning like Taft. And so, and the war between that and the blob, which used to be known as the Eastern Foreign Policy Establishment, has been going on for a long time. And their views were badly discredited by World War II, and remained discredited until Vietnam. And then they enjoyed a resurrection. So it's just the old debate. It's just that Ben, because he's a kid, or maybe he's not a kid, he doesn't really know anything historically, he thinks he's like broken free.
Well, I have to say, my reading in history has sort of convinced me that one thing that people don't do is learn from history.
It's true, but they can learn from history having at least learned history. But then there's the not learning history, not learning from history part.
Well, that does seem to be another kind of right-left consensus in
Right.
the U.S. that Henry
Better
Ford
not to
was
know.
right. History is bunk.
Right.
Well, is the blob weaker now, a lot weaker now? And do you think the realists, isolationists, or whatever you want to call them, have the upper hand looking at the next administration?
Well, this is what I think has been so funny, because the realists, the professional realists, the self-described realists have been spending all these years just talking, oh, woe is me, nobody's listening to us, etc. And it probably is true, sort of, that the foreign policy establishment is not where they are. The country is where they are. And I think that both Obama and Trump have been closer to being what realists claim. Now, the realists themselves have turned out, I mean, realists / restrainers, right, and all of that have turned out to have a really big problem that they don't have a good answer to, which is China. I mean, a truly, I think a straightforward and defensible America first restrainer policy would say, as Americans did say before World War II, what do we care what's happening in Asia? What does it matter to us? That's not our problem. Why don't we say about Asia what we say about Europe, which is they're rich, let them handle their own problems. And if China and Japan come to blows, well, then we'll see how we feel about it. This decision to say that China is a big problem that we really need to address vitiates the whole America first restrainer position, because the knock-on implications of that are you need to work with allies, you even need to work with the Europeans, you got to pull everybody together, you have to make commitments to an island like Taiwan. Is there any chance that a true realist would say that we care what happens to Taiwan, you know? And certainly not a 1930s America Firster would have said that. So I think that the problem is there is no, the country is where the realists should be. I don't know if it's where the realists actually are. If that
so you
makes
think
sense.
sort of Xi Jinping will save the blob? Is that?
Well, Xi Jinping has, I mean, it's also changed the blob, because now the blob, which by the way, I don't know how I don't think I'm a member of the blob, because I disagree with, you know, disagree with so much of what they do, but I'm amused to see that the blob has now decided that we need to end strategic ambiguity with Taiwan. That would have been an absolutely anathema, and was 20 years ago.
That is a really interesting shift.
Oh my God. I mean, to see Richard Haas in Foreign Affairs, I think that's where it was. Yeah. Obviously, it had to be, you know, calling for an end. Basically, didn't he call for an end to strategic ambiguity?
Yes, he has. He has.
Yeah. And, you know, I was fighting that battle on the losing side, literally, you know, 20, 25 years ago.
Right. Well, as you recall, one can be prematurely anti-fascist, one can be prematurely pro.
And that's been my problem. That's been my problem all along. That's been my problem all along. I was anti-China before it was cool.
Yeah, it was okay. No, it is. I mean, it is a very interesting problem for realists that, and certainly the people I've talked to in that zone.
Yeah.
One of the great things, by the way, about being a columnist, I'm discovering, you are too, is that you end up having to talk to everybody, because.
No, you talk to everybody. I don't talk to anybody, Walter, but I'm glad you do.
Oh, well, you need to know what people think.
No, it's better not to. I find it depressing. You know, I worked for Irving Kristol for a year, which was a great experience of my life. And I remember so well, one of the things he always used to say is, I don't read anything that I'm going to disagree with.
That, you know, I don't know.
He was a happy guy. He was Irving Kristol was a happy man.
He would have hated Twitter.
No, are you kidding? My God, he wrote his op-eds, his editorials for the Wall Street Journal out on a yellow pad. I mean, it was unbelievable.
That would be an interesting thought. What would the Twitter feed of Irving Kristol look like? You should operate that Twitter feed.
So anyway, yeah, I think China, anyway, you were in the middle of saying that China's a problem, right?
Well, but what for realists, because it does split the realist restrainer camp, I think, right down the middle.
Who's on the true restrict, I mean, who's on the sort of true America first position on China? Because even Barry
I
Posen
think there's
is,
some people at the Quincy Institute
well, like who?
well, I don't want to say when they're not, I mean,
Oh, you'd not be, well, you can't point to something people have written. This is more
right.
behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, this is, I
Yeah.
mean, just things, these are based on conversations.
Oh yeah, okay, okay.
But I would say there's a substantial faction at Quincy that even, it might be time to pull the chain on China at some point, but there are a lot of people I think who would, as President Trump said in 2016, maybe Japan should just build their own bomb.
Right. Well, they can do that.
I know they have that. I think they have enough plutonium for 6,000 bombs.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Yes. No, and they're very aware of that.
Yeah.
But then China is contained, and America is off the hook. What's wrong with that? There is definitely there is that school of thought.
And that is again, I think that is the coherent position. And, even though we sort of, I think our narrative is that the isolationists lost the argument because of World War II about whether America was actually invulnerable. But the truth is they didn't. And that issue is still, I think, on the, is America truly in any in a relative sense, sort of invulnerable to what happens around the world, I think is a question yet to be tested. I think we went into World War II for reasons that were not strictly based on the fact that we now felt vulnerable. And so I think it's a coherent position to say it's wrong. And I think I could point out the failures of it, but it's a coherent position to say, hey, let them fight it out and we'll see where we come out on the other end of it,
Yeah, whoever wins will still want to trade.
Right. That was the argument about Hitler taking over Germany, that we will build trade. That actually turned out to be wrong. I mean, Hitler actually did not believe in trade, but that's another matter,
Yeah.
But I think that the people who, whatever faction it is that takes China seriously and says we have to do something, I think that blows up restraint.
Right. The question is whether it does it politically. Whether inside the Beltway, I think it's safe to say, and even on the island of Manhattan, the consensus that we really do need to think hard about China and actually do some things is reasonably solid and reasonably bipartisan.
As long as you don't spell out what the things are.
Well, and then there are questions like, well, what if they promise to close all their coal factories in exchange for Taiwan? Seriously, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but there are contingencies that make that consensus less robust.
Yeah.
But
I think that what would also make it less robust is if we faced the reality that I think we're trying desperately not to face, which is that it's really fun yelling at them. It's really fun using our superior economy to push them down, etc. But they have cards to play that we don't want to sit down and play with them.
Yes, exactly.
And that gets into, we just think we're so far away from thinking about military action because apparently that's all OBE. But at some point, they're going to test us militarily. And that's where I think the Manhattan Consensus, whatever that may be, falls apart.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the other problem is I'm not sure that public opinion out there in the country at large would, I can't, if the next president goes to Congress and say we need to up the defense budget by 10%.
Right.
Not necessarily, I'm not sure that the response to that would be an overwhelming groundswell of public support.
No, and I mean, again, if you took a poll on should we go to war with China over Taiwan, what do you think the poll would say?
Yeah.
I mean, and look, the great thing is this is what America does over and over again, actually. There is I said this to some Chinese businessmen recently, but I mean, basically the history is now littered with the carcasses of autocratic regimes who became absolutely confident that the United States would not do anything to them because we ourselves were convinced that we were not going to do anything, only to discover that at the end we do. And that's true of Germany twice. It's true of the Japanese in spades. And I wonder whether the Chinese have learned enough history not to fall into what I like to call the America trap.
Yeah, I do wonder, because it does seem to me there are forces driving them that they're not fully in control of either.
Well, that's all. I mean, I think that in China, there's the usual problem that comes with a rising power, which is there's obviously a division between those who say, you know, you're going to get us. This is true in Japan in 1941 too. I mean, there was a real active debate, and some of these people, including Admiral Yamamoto, said, ultimately, they're going to kick our ass, you know, and this is a mistake. Okay, you're underestimating what America is capable of. But then there's other people saying, oh, look how they're behaving. They're retreating left and right. And by the way, we have to do this or we'll be under their thumb forever, right? And so I'm sure that debate has been going on in China. And I think that we, in our way, and them, as you say, for their own reasons, are much more in the to heck with it. We'll, you know, now's our time, you know?
Exactly. No, I actually think that maybe one of the changes is that it's not simply that China sees the United States as less focused and strong than 10 years ago, but that China also is less optimistic about its own future. Because I think there was a time when an argument in China would sort of end with, look, in 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, we can come back to the same question and we'll be in a much stronger position.
Right.
So why do this now? Looking at the demographics, the economic trends, some of the pollution issues and other things, that's not as clear, I think.
Do we have any, do you feel like we have a read into Chinese thinking that suggests that they're in that mode of things are going to get worse, not better, as the years go by?
I actually think there's, I think if you look at the way that they've been tightening, you know, like basically battening down the hatches in every possible way, it generally seems to me that authoritarian regimes are lazy. You know, that you know, it's actually kind of the more secure you feel, the more you let people publish op-eds that are a little bit off center or whatever.
Yeah.
You just don't care.
Yeah.
But as you worry, you really try to tighten everything up, get control. There's been so much energy behind that push.
Yeah. It's just that, I mean, there's always a interesting question is what is the relationship between internal politics and foreign policy? I mean, when Stalin consolidated his position, he nevertheless was conducting a very cautious foreign policy.
Right. But, you know, again, but Stalin did sort of believe, first of all, Stalin thought, I'm actually weaker, you know, Germany is, I'm behind.
Right.
And I'm, you know, and maybe I'll catch up in 20 years, but actually Stalin's game is survival.
Yeah.
China, you know, China had been playing the game of, we're going to get what, you know, we're on the right track. We're going to get what we want. So that it wasn't Stalin's patience based so much in fear as a calculating patience based in confidence about a better future.
Yeah.
I don't think
I know, it's just, it's interesting because there really are incredible parallels between this debate and the Japanese internal debate in the 20s, 30s, and then obviously, which is that there was a whole school of Japanese who said, we're doing fine in this Anglo-American run system, and we're gonna do fine. And all we need to do is keep our cool. And then for whatever reason, which was related to a lot of internal anti-liberal politics, but for whatever reason, ultimately the people who said, no, we can't wait anymore, came to the fore. And that happened in Germany too, right? From Bismarck to Wilhelm. Was a kind of transition from we're good to no, we really need to push. And that could just be a natural progression for rising powers.
But for the Germans, it does seem fear of Russia seems to have been the thing. They saw Russia much the way some people in the West see China.
Well,
and they didn't want to wait.
It was Russia, but it was also their own objectives, you know, which were looking at Britain, they felt that they couldn't, as long as Britain controlled the oceans, they would never be a great world power. And then
Right.
Russia becomes a problem because you can't deal with Britain unless you've already dealt with Russia. So I think, you know, again, it's partly your ambition or your self-perception of where you should be. And of course, the Chinese have what the Germans didn't have because they had no history to fall back on. The Chinese have a memory, you know, they have an active memory of the time when they were hegemonic in their world, and that's what they think is the normal situation. And so they're always trying to close the gap between what exists and what they think ought to exist.
Let's flip to Russia, because it's certainly one of the persisting ideas in American foreign policy, and you heard it with Obama, you hear it even more, I think, with Trump, is that if we can just peel Russia off from China, then things are going, that helps us with China, it helps us with everything else. Let's find out what the price is and figure out how to pay it. Do you think that's realistic? What should our approach to Russia be?
I think that's a mistaken approach for two reasons. One is that Russia and China are always going to be fundamentally at odds. It would be a very strange universe in which they are not. I really believe that if you're a Russian and you wake up sweating bullets at 3 a.m, what you're sweating about is the fact that China is going to take over Siberia one way or another. And China is a big, and by the way, the racist feelings on both sides are enormous. I mean, they both think the other one is a monkey and have always felt that way. So I think that they have all kinds of common interests, and their number one common interest is us. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they will ever be like real, work together allies. The irony is even Hitler's Germany and Japan were not actually allies. They were both pursuing their own goals. They had common interests. That turned out to be a problem for us, but it wasn't like, if only we could, we would have been happy to pull the Japanese away from Germany, but they had their own reason for doing what they were doing. So that's the first thing. I don't really think they're that tight, Russia and China. The other is, though, the psychology of Russia is so interesting. It's a Western-looking psychology, and Russia judges itself against the West. It judged itself against Europe. Now it judges itself against the United States. Their policy toward the West of them makes no sense except from a psychological point of view. They don't actually have to worry that Poland is going to invade them or Lithuania is going to invade them. And they certainly know the United States is not looking to invade them. So they create a security crisis for themselves that doesn't even exist because it's part of their psychology. And I don't think we can do much to change that, honestly. If we wanted to give them half of Europe again, I think we could probably work out a settlement that we could live with, just as we lived with it during the Cold War, right?
I was about to say you were sounding very Kennan-esque, but Kennan was saying actually, the more you give them, the more suspicious they'll be.
Well, that could well be true as well. I just think that their natural sense of themselves is that they control Central Europe, right? I mean, that they control Poland and they control the Balts, etc. They don't have a natural sense of themselves dominating all of Europe,
I do think, there was that great moment at Potsdam when I think it was Churchill still there, congratulated Stalin for reaching Potsdam, and Stalin just grumped, Tsar Alexander got to Paris.
Oh yeah, right. But no. But even the Russians know that it's artificial for them to be in Paris.
Well, to control, but even so, in the 19th century, if the royal house of the Archduchy of Parma died out, the Tsar got a vote in who was coming in.
True.
And the European Union is basically, so far as it's anything at all, it's an organization to keep the US and Russia from having votes in those matters.
I guess, although they themselves can't vote on those matters, but that's another problem.
They can't, keeping other people out of the way while we dither endlessly, nothing wrong with that as an objective.
That's true. Hey, there were worse foreign policy objectives than that, Walter.
Right. But when I look at the EU agenda in the East and at Russia's agenda, I do wonder, where's America's role? What role, whether it's in Ukraine or Belarus, what makes sense for us to do there? What would be your read?
Yeah, I mean, I think these have been, a series of sort of own goals on our part. We had the capacity, if we chose, to make Ukraine off limits to Russia, even if it hadn't been admitted to NATO yet. And I think that I never felt there was any danger that if we looked serious, that the Russians were going to say, well, that's okay, we'll go to war with you anyway. I don't think that the idea of getting into the war with the United States with Russia in the condition that it has been in and so this was classic case of Putin pushing to see how far he could get.
So we should have guaranteed Ukraine's boundaries.
Yeah, I think we could have guaranteed Ukraine. I think we could have guaranteed Georgia if we'd chosen to. And if this had been the early Cold War and we were taking stuff seriously instead of thinking that the whole world is coming together and everything's going to be fine, and oh my God, why did they do that? We would have definitely said, no, those are off limits. Just because they're not in NATO doesn't mean they're off limits. And then Russia would have been pissed and yelling and screaming and doing little nefarious, things, but they would not have done as the kind of blatant, cross-border aggression that they did. So this is totally us just letting it happen.
Now, is Crimea reversible, do you think?
Well, not in I don't think it's on anybody's agenda really to reverse it. So you'd have to have, I have a hard time imagining it unless you had some, if the most liberal segments of the Yeltsin government took power and had the kind of internationalist idea that someone like Andrei Kozyrev sort of represented, the foreign minister, one of Russia's foreign ministers in that period, who really just wants to become part of the EU. Yeah, then I could see trading again with Ukraine. But absent that, I would say any normal Russian leader is not going to give back Crimea. And I don't know that the West is demanding that anybody give back Crimea.
So what's the point of the sanctions over Crimea if they no longer really represent a serious policy?
Well, because there's an ongoing conflict in Georgia, in the Donbass and elsewhere. And I think that if Russia would get out of the rest of Ukraine, I would imagine the sanctions might be.
So that would be the deal, is Donbass, peace in the Donbass for no sanctions.
Yeah, I'm sure that deal is in some form or other is on the table. I'm sure we would have all kinds of how do we save face on Crimea, etc. But I think if the Russians started playing ball in the rest of in the rest of Ukraine, that we would make that deal. Yeah, and I think they know that too.
Would the Germans go along with that?
The Germans would go along with anything, as long as it's, because they would love to have a rapprochement with Russia, and it's only
international law was sacred.
The Germans are not, loonies. I mean, they're very pragmatic, and
so that's a settlement that could happen.
Pardon?
That's a settlement that could happen.
Oh, absolutely. But the Russians, Putin doesn't want that settlement for whatever reason.
Right. Do you think Biden would like it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think, whatever else is the case, I don't think Crimea, as horrible as this is, I don't think Manchuria was a hang up, even though we made a big deal out of it either,
right.
And so it was more about what Japan was going to do next that was the problem. And so I don't think Crimea is an obstacle if Putin would are actually interested in solving these problems.
Should we be promoting revolution in Belarus?
I don't know whether we actually have the capacity to do that, but it would then, of course, immediately beg the question, what do we intend to do about it if Russia sends in the tanks?
Right, right.
I think that this is one of those cases where, while I think Ukraine was something we could have prevented, I don't know exactly. Our relationship with Belarus has been so almost non-existent for so long that it's just hard to imagine us taking our stand there. So should we encourage them? It's their decision. When you say we shouldn't encourage people to rise up, it's their decision whether to rise up or not. You just have to be clear that you're not going to be sending in the 82nd Airborne to help them out when the time comes.
Yeah.
which they know.
But we now have a complicating factor that sort of bridges Eastern Europe and the Middle East, that is to say, Turkey
Yeah.
and Erdogan. And we have this war going on with Armenia and Azerbaijan. And you got, Armenia, which is certainly the country that has the deepest support in the United States of the two, is a sort of ally of Russia and Iran, more or less. Azerbaijan of Turkey with a chunk of Russia, but has been very helpful to us, I think, and to Israel and Iran. So how does all of this, how would you construct a policy for all of this?
We gonna go through every frozen conflict? Is that the way? Is that where we're gonna?
This one strikes me. It strikes me that when thinking about the kind of boundaries of the West, or boundaries of American power and influence, the Caucasus kind of matters.
The thing is that, and I don't mean this may sound like a cop-out, and I'll try to come to an answer. In an earlier world, this was something we could have done more about than now. And there's a whole sequence of events that have occurred over a 20-year period, which have put us in a worse and worse position to be able to do anything. The first being, I think, the crack up between the EU and Turkey. I mean, I really do believe that was a very unfortunate event when the EU made it clear that they didn't want to take in Turkey, and I think that helped set Turkey in a different direction, and we've been paying the price for that to some extent. Then, circumstantially, because of the Iraq War, that kind of messed up our relationship with Turkey. So our ability to have a useful influence on Turkey is as low as it's ever been, I think. And so if you can't influence Turkey and your other options are how to influence Iran and Russia, you have a problem, right? And so, I have tremendous sympathy for Armenia, although Armenia has its own problems. But I just don't know at this point. We would have to get ourselves back in the game in so many different fundamental ways. We would have to be playing in the EU in a much more active way. We would have to have a different kind of relationship with Turkey, which may have something to do. We also blew it on the Turkey relationship. We also blew it in Syria. Right. We made it clear we were completely unreliable for them. And we did things they thought were directly aimed at them. So, you have to rewind a lot of history in order to get to a place where you feel that you could do some good.
Well, I'm just thinking that, if you look at the military developments so far, it's not unlikely that the Azerbaijanis are going to continue to advance into Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah.
And it's not unlikely that you're going to have a massive refugee flight in the winter in COVID of a people whose earlier genocide is a significant political fact, not just in the US, but in Europe as well.
And you know what we'll do? We'll say, oh my God, this is terrible.
Okay. Does that have implications, do you think? Does that, are there consequences of that? Because I kind of agree with you. That's the most likely thing that will happen.
Yeah, it will have. I mean, all of these, again, so well, history is not a kind of, and then this happens and then this happens, because there's 100 things happening, right? And so will this contribute to the general breakdown so that when you hit your next problem, will your failure on this problem impact your ability to deal with the next problem? Yes. You know what I mean? But there were so many intervening factors in history.
Right.
This could turn out to be irrelevant compared to what the next thing is, Right. But I think we have been, over the past 20 years probably, been gradually, if you want, pulling out the Jenga things, you know what I mean? That we've gradually been creating or allowing to proliferate more and more of these kinds of problems.
Right.
And then it's a kind of a chaos theory question, at what point does the whole pile tip over? And that certainly is the analogy from the 20s and 30s, because we really let a lot of things happen in the 20s that seemed fairly trivial, but
Right.
their consequence collectively was to take us to the 30s.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I've
know I'm
been
not supposed to talk about the 30s because then people say, well, you're always thinking about the 30s, and that's my
right.
problem.
No, but I've actually been thinking a lot about. I'm calling it the Lodge Consensus of
Yeah,
American foreign policy after World War One,
yeah,
which was not nakedly isolationist by
yeah,
any means,
yeah.
and and it's actually a more sophisticated vision of the world and founded on a certain view of history. I mean, it has a certain kind of intellectual integrity to it,
Well,
and it
that's
didn't
I'm
work.
writing about that right now, and I'll get back to you when I can show you. I think that that's overstating Lodge's vision, but I understand what you're
Well, a
saying.
Lodge consensus, it's the way you would call the post-Cold War the Clinton consensus. He didn't embody every piece of it.
Right,
But
but I mean, I think even the sort of allegedly clever new form of internationalism in the 1920s was not, in fact, clever and actually led to disaster. So
well, I mean, I
that's
would say the same thing about some of the post-Cold War consensus. I mean,
well,
that's the
that couldn't
comparison I
be
want to
true.
make.
It's just a very different. It's the opposite consensus is the only thing.
Yeah. Well, but some of the things that interest me as similarities, they both rest on a kind of an unearned optimism about where history is headed.
Absolutely fair. Absolutely
And
fair. Right.
in both cases, what that does is it papers over the gap between what the American people can be persuaded to do and what the international system might require them to do in their own interests might require them to do.
Absolutely. But I think that is a perennial problem. And I think that's the normal American problem, which somehow the fear of communism kind of broke
Right.
us out of.
And it is actually interesting that after World War II, the first snapback was essentially to Lodge II. I mean, we
Right,
were getting out very, very quickly.
right,
And
right.
it was it was really hard to turn that around. And without Stalin, we could have never done it, I think.
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, the experience of World War II was such, and the 30s was such that the minute anybody popped up who could remotely look like what hit, and Stalin was that guy.
Except when Churchill made his Iron Curtain speech. Churchill, Mr. Anti-Munich, makes his speech at Fulton.
Yeah.
And Truman applauds. He has to apologize all over the place for that applause. I was applauding the man, not the sentiments. My goodness, Iron Curtain.
No, absolutely. I mean, and obviously Truman was going to try to cut the defense budget as much as he could, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And George Kennan said at the time that we shouldn't stay in Europe because we're incapable of doing it. That was his big argument.
And that was clearly in Roosevelt's mind at Yalta. I think is that he's not going to be able to keep troops in Europe for a year after.
Right.
So you make the deal you can make.
Right. No, there's a whole phenomenon which somebody like you should write about, or eventually, which is the phenomenon of Americans willing to keep troops in places forever as long as you don't continually remind them that they're there. I mean, when Dean Acheson was asked, I think by Senator Hickenlooper of those days, how long troops were going to stay in Europe, I think he said 2 years. And,
well, there was also a process of kind of acclimatizing Americans to that. I've always thought, the album that Elvis Presley cut when he was drafted into the Army, he actually cut an Army album. And it's got, I don't know if you've heard it, but probably on some Amazon streaming or something. It's got numbers like the Occupation GI Blues. And he's complaining about, but it's, and this, this was a very popular album, and it's Americans occupying.
It was part of life in those days, right?
That's right. And with the draft, but I think the sense was you're probably not going to fight, but still they were there.
I mean, the thing that I'm always interested in, we always talk about, people say we're overstretched now with our troop deployments, and I just think back on the 1950s post-Korea, so a time of absolute peace under Eisenhower. We had something like 1 million troops deployed overseas.
Yeah.
Out of a population of 180 million. And today we have a population of 330 million, and we probably have under 200,000 deployed overseas. But today we feel like we're overstretched.
Right. So what you're really looking at then, from your point of view, is we've got the cycle of sort of American delay, inconsequentialism, while things gradually get worse, and then one morning we wake up when it's just they've bombed Pearl Harbor or whatever,
Yeah.
or they've attacked the World Trade Center, whatever it might be that wakes us up. And then on the other side, you have the cycle of people progressively saying, you know what, the Americans are so they start out scared of the Americans and they don't do things, but then they get more and more comfortable. And then finally, they just do something that crosses the line and wakes us up because they have become so convinced we'll do nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the cycle of history.
That's the America trap that we play on everybody, including Saddam Hussein, including Slobodan Milosevic, et cetera, et cetera. We're very convincing because we mean it, that we don't want to do anything.
I know, it's great. One of the things I wrote about in Special Providence is that American democracy can't be consciously hypocritical.
Right.
But we can do things that actually manifest the most perfect hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
Everyone in the American process being sincere the entire way through. It's
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Well, look, I mean, I'm trying to figure this out and think it through, but I mean, I really have come where I am right now is that we have also, again, in the America, it's a unique situation. So, you talk about what China's perception of where it ought to be is, which is bigger than where it is now. And that's normal. Countries, especially rising powers, have a view of what they should be that is bigger than what they currently are, or they have a memory in history. The American self-image is actually to be smaller than we actually are. I mean, we still revere, the fact that I think that the Quincy people don't really understand John Quincy Adams at all, right. And they just have jumped on this phrase, no monster.
I know, that's
destroy, and it's
even in that speech, it does, it's
even that speech is like he's also urging people to rise up against monarchs in Europe, etc. But okay, fine. But even if John Quincy Adams actually meant what they think he meant, why are we looking to a guy in 1820, 3 or 4 or 5 to guide our foreign policy? I mean, it's crazy. The fact that we go back to Washington's farewell address and the Monroe Doctrine, we're a completely different country now.
Yeah, and yet we go back in the same way to the Federalist Papers, and so we actually, we venerate our national past.
Right, and I think
now we're less interested into that. I'm not sure it'll be better when we lose that.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that the interesting thing is, of course, from our constitutional perspective, I think it's very important that we continue to revere the Declaration and the Constitution, right, and the founders' views. But first of all, I don't even think the founders thought that what they were, when Washington gives his farewell address, I don't think he thought he was controlling American foreign policy 200 years in advance.
No. Well, again, I think what people do is they take a kind of superficial sloganeering proof texting
right
approach. So they get a quote that, they'll forget Jefferson congratulating Monroe on his alliance with England.
Yeah, right. But anyway, the point, the conflict therefore is that unlike other countries whose capacity is outstripped by their ambitions outstrip their capacity, Americans' ambition is less than their capacity. I mean, America has the capacity to continue sort of dominating the world if it wanted to, as it has shown repeatedly. And yet Americans don't think that that's what their role should be. And I think we have been witnessing for 100 years at least, the bizarre tension between the self-perception of Americans and the capacity of America.
Right. Well, I remember in some of the early Iraq days, I was hearing a good deal then of, boy, what the Americans need is a British-style imperial civil service that will go out and govern these places. I'm thinking, well, that's the last thing we'll ever come up with.
Well, of course it is, because we would never admit to ourselves that we wanted to be that.
That would require, right,
and we're not that, by the way. And this is where I've always thought that Neil Ferguson has just been dead wrong. I mean, we are not the British Empire. The British felt that they had a inborn vocation for ruling.
Right.
Their empire was everything to them. It was their identity. Whereas America, it's the opposite of that. Our global strength is not even part of our identity.
No. Well, I mean, I think our self-image is we are the liberating country, not the conqueror.
Maybe, but in any case, it is not our vocation to be ruling other people.
No, no. Well, of course, what we do is we want them to spontaneously
Right.
do what we would have them do if
And
we were ruling them. But
exactly.
we don't want, we want to cut out that middle step and not rule them.
Exactly. That's why whenever we intervene, we have a foot out the door as soon as we have our foot in the door. That's why.
Right. But also when we intervene, we both put a foot out the door and then start giving a long list of things that we want the people to do.
Exactly. Even though we're not going to actually force them to do it right away.
Now we're leaving Afghanistan, but we really want to make sure that the women's literacy program in the hill towns is moving forward.
And that the Taliban keep fighting ISIS for us.
Yeah, we have a list, but again, but we don't want to make, only as a last resort. By the way, the book that when I teach American foreign policy history classes, I always start with, I don't know if you know it, is Benito Sereno by Herman Melville. You have to read, it's a novella.
Okay.
And I think it's a lot of it is just American foreign policy in one incident. It's incredibly, it's based on a real life thing that happened in the early 19th century of this American captain, a New England, sealing ship comes across this Spanish hulk, and it's in bad repair. It's carrying a bunch of slaves. They don't seem very disciplined. It's bad. So first thing that the Americans think about is, well, let's help them out. Let's send them humanitarian aid. So they send them like food and fresh water. The ship is still not working right. They need technical assistance. So we send them sails and ropes and all that. It's still not good. We're going to put our helmsman on to help them steer. Well, ultimately that starts to fail. And the next stage is regime change. Move right up the ladder. And there are a lot of spoilers, which I won't.
Well, I will read it now. Thank you, Walter.
But at the end, it's a very unusual book because, books are things where characters have experiences which change them. Yeah. And at the end of the book, neither the American captain nor the Spanish captain has changed in any way.
Yeah.
So the Spanish character understands everything but can do nothing, and the American character can do everything but understands nothing.
Yeah, no, it's we're a very peculiar country to have been put in this position, to have found ourselves in this position. And our reaction to it has been the central drama of the world really now for, over 110 years. And we're the wonderful thing about that is we're also completely unaware of that we do not realize that everybody in power in the world wakes up every morning asking what the United States is going to do. At least they have been. They may get used to not doing that. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about we talk about Armenia now, and I was just thinking, watching what's going on in the Mediterranean now is really kind of fun because it looks very 19th century.
Yes,
there's less America. It's like Russia is here, France is there, France and Turkey. What's going on in North Africa, and it's all these sort of medium and larger powers in picking sides, and
amazingly it doesn't seem to be more peaceful.
Well, it's not more peaceful. The question is, and there are a lot of people who would say, and I probably would be one of them, this is what the consequence of America pulling out is. But I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, good, so what? Let them deal with these problems, and even if they can't deal with them, I'm sure a lot of people would say, did we deal with them are we that much better at dealing with them? I think that's wrong, and I think it's wrong not because of what's happening right now, but because of how all these things ultimately build on each other. Yeah. But it's hard to prove that that's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, well, let's do this again sometime. It's been a lot of fun.
I agree.
It's fun is maybe the wrong word. You're not exactly giving us lots of cheerful thoughts about the future, but you do it in a very cheerful way.
Well, it's just analysis. You could still hope. Hope is not analysis. You can have hope.
There we go.
No, but I mean, I do think that, as I say, put it this way, America's not out of business, and I think we're capable of recovering. I just don't think we are going to choose to do so anytime soon.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Great to see you. See you again soon.
Thanks, Walter.